Welcome everyone to today's webinar, another technical tinker with PayTo, virtual fireside chat. I'm Chris Ponton Dwyer, Senior Sales Executive at Zepto. Thanks so much for joining us today. I'm hosting today's webinar from the Sutherland Shire in Sydney, and I'd like to acknowledge the Dharawal people, who are the traditional custodians of the lands within the Sutherland Shire, and pay my respect to elders and their families, past, present, and emerging. I'd like to extend that acknowledgement to the various lands everyone is joining us from today. Toy Story 3, Godfather Part 2, The Empire Strikes Back. What do all of these things have to do with today? These are all examples of sequels that were better than the original. And today's webinar, we aim to achieve what these other great franchises have done. See, last month, we ran a technical webinar on PayTo called A Technical Tinker with PayTo. And we were overwhelmed by the response, both in terms of attendance and the brilliant questions posted by the audience. So much so we ran out of time, and there were many questions submitted that went unanswered. And so we are here today with our follow-up, our sequel, another technical tinker with PayTo. Now, of course, when deciding to watch a sequel, you may be thinking, do I need to have seen the original in order for this to make sense? Is there content I need to know in order to get the most out of this experience? Short answer, absolutely not. I mean, sure, if you haven't seen the first, please make sure you go back and watch the recording. It's available on our YouTube channel, which our team will share the link to in the chat shortly. But today's conversation is really about you, the audience, and ensuring the panel answer the big and important questions you have in regards to PayTo, how it works, and what it means for your business. So how can you get your questions answered? Bit of housekeeping. You'll see 3 icons at the top right of the screen. The message icon is the chat box. You can post here general comments during today's conversation with other audience members. Just below is the Q&A icon. Here is where you can post your questions for me to ask the panel. I'll be monitoring the feed during the course of today's conversation, and we'll try to get to as many as I can, if not all of them. And if you think someone else has asked a great question and you want to ensure it's answered by the panel, you can vote by clicking the up arrow icon under the specific question. This will push it to the top of the list for me to read. So if you've got questions, get cracking, start populating that Q&A feed. You'll also see another icon in there. That next one down is for our poll. So audience participation is key. And to get you, our audience, warmed up, we have a poll the team will be sharing now, and we are keen to get your responses. So as that's coming up, you'll see the question is, which of the following are you trying to address or improve with respects to payments in your business? Take some time, read through the options: speed of payment, operational efficiencies, customer experience, security or surety and safety of payment, or is it something else? And if it's something else, please post some comments in the chat. We'd love to hear what are priorities, what you're trying to address. So we'll leave that open as the results start to come through. But first, before we kind of kick on, I'll come to those results later in the conversation. And before I introduce the panel and get into today's Q&A, I'd like to give a bit of a market update on PayTo. So at this stage in the development of PayTo, the stats we are primarily focused on are the availability of PayTo for consumers and businesses to make payments. So from a consumer perspective, 91% of retail or personal bank accounts have PayTo available. This includes all 4 majors who are live today. So in theory, on this call right now, 9 in 10 of everyone joining us should have PayTo available in their internet or mobile banking. From a business perspective and business bank accounts, availability remains at around 15%, and this will continue to grow over the next 12 months until it too reaches ubiquity. From Zepto's perspective, we are continuing to see more and more businesses sign up to PayTo and seeing momentum build with businesses going live, offering PayTo to their customers. Unfortunately, we're not at a stage where we can discuss the detail of any of these, but stay tuned as we look forward to sharing some customer stories with you in the future. Now to welcome the panel. For those of you who attended our previous webinar, you'll see some familiar faces, but we have plenty of new joiners today So let me quickly introduce our panelists. Justin Steer is Zepto's Head of Solutions and Customer Success. Justin leads our team that is responsible for supporting our customers from a solution and technical perspective. Next up, Jaimie Wistaff, Senior Solutions Engineer. Jaimie not only supports our customers working across a range of projects to support their implementation of PayTo, she also leads some of our efforts to support the wider industry from a testing perspective and plays a lead role in building and maintaining our online PayTo Help Centre. Welcome, Jaimie. Last but not least, Tom Campbell, our Product Manager for PayTo. Tom works closely with Zepto's engineering team to drive our PayTo product strategy and roadmap. Tom also represents Zepto and our role as a connected institution with Australian Payments Plus at industry forums as part of a wider effort to help launch and grow PayTo successfully in the Australian market. Welcome, Tom, and welcome team. Now, to kick things off, I wanted to start off with a warm-up question for each of you on the panel that I'd love to get your answer to. And the audience, if you have a question, an answer to this question, we'd love to see that in the chat as well. So my question is, do you know how many direct debits come out of your bank account each month? And for a bonus point, because we all love bonus points, can you name the next direct debit that will come out of your bank account? Tom Campbell, I'm going to go to you.
Yeah, awesome. There would be something like 5. I hope it's 5. If there's more, that's a problem. And the next one, I think, is my health insurance.
Okay,
Yeah, cool.
okay. Some maybes and some I thinks in there, but that's all right. Jaimie?
Very easy for me since I only have one. And it's for my phone bill. So very easy.
Very, very simple, very simple. Yeah. All right, and Justin?
I've got no idea, probably too many. I do know when the next one to come out is. It's childcare payment, which will come out on the 6th, which is tomorrow. That gets debited every fortnight. So yeah, that'll be the next one.
Okay, very good. That's so I think it's direct debits. It's one of those things where they seem to creep up on you, and sometimes you've got funds available, sometimes you don't. But they're really, I think, speaks to a lack of transparency and visibility from a consumer's perspective. But let's come back to that later.
I just want to add that as you said that, I rememred I actually have 2.
There you
go.
There you
lack
go.
of transparency. Yeah.
If only there was a product that's not taken visible.
Great point, Tom. Look, Tom, I might get you to share your screen actually. Now, to the audience, like any sequel, you may see some of the same jokes. Maybe the plot line will be repeated, but I think it's always helpful to have somewhat of a recap on some of the topics that were covered previously, and really, I suppose, set a baseline for today's discussion. So to kick things off, we're going to step through a clickable prototype that will demonstrate a PayTo experience for a fictitious insurance provider. So Tom has got his screen up now. Will step us through the PayTo payment experience from a customer's perspective. And then we will talk to what's happening behind the scenes from a technical perspective. A quick shout out to our friends at AP Plus who have made this available to us today. And to the audience, if you have any questions as we talk through this, then please feel free to pop them in the Q&A box and we'll get to them right after. Tom, over to you.
Thank you very much, Chris. So echoing Chris's sentiment there, a big thank you to Australian Payments Plus for making this available. And this is something in the public domain that, may be of assistance when it comes to creating your own front-end merchant experiences for your customers, so that the PayTo experience makes a bit more sense. So today we're going to walk through a full checkout flow. This won't take particularly long, but our fake insurer is Kanga Coverage. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to get a quote and we're going to set up a PayTo agreement and some payments for that insurance. So you can imagine as a consumer entering into that Kanga Coverage experience and working through this process. Obviously some details, this is sort of obfuscated, but if we start to compare a couple of plans and say we're going to go for Silver Hospital and Extras with a payment frequency of monthly, let's select that. there's going to be some space where some personal details will need to be provided by that end customer, so we can let our imagination do the work there. Continuing along through with fund details as well, and now we get to the interesting part with our payment details. So what you can see here is a sort of a potential sort of real world way in which PayTo may be heroed amongst other potential payment methods here. And of course, in this case and every case, we want to select PayTo. There's an opportunity here now to make use of either a BSB and account number or a PayID as an account identifier. And so by entering a PayID, what you'll see here is a little validation point there to confirm that I am in fact not Cameron Smith, but for the purposes of this demo, I am. And in this case, you can see that they're becoming sort of a validation point for that end customer, and that's a feature of our addressing service integration. So assuming that's all worked out well, and we're going through to review our cover now, you can sort of see here a brief summary of all of the payment details, and specifically looking at using those premium payments through PayTo. So if we submit that to Kanga coverage, this will give you a sense of the flow. So in this case here, there's sort of a summary screen, and what this is sort of saying is, all right, we're all good to go. However, there is another step, and you need to navigate to your banking application to complete it. So after hopefully within a minute, you'd expect there to be a pop-up notification from the banking application to confirm that there's action required from the consumer's behalf, ideally whilst they're in this flow. That'll then give them the opportunity to log in using their biometrics or passcode, and going into this banking application to approve, to review and approve that PayTo payment agreement. So in this case, we can see inside this fictitious banking app, after we've navigated away from that flow, that these are the terms of the agreement: $150 billed on a monthly basis as expected. And given that's all looking good, yes, we're going to authorize that agreement. And fantastic, that is now done and dusted. So what you can expect to see as a consumer inside your banking application is, again, sort of another list of your active agreements. And so by easily sort of navigating back to Kanga coverage, fantastic, immediately you get a notification that you are now protected, that you have this payment arrangement all teed up and ready to go. And that's all powered by PayTo and ideally Zepto under the hood. The end.
Brilliant. Thanks so much. I think that really brings to life, from a customer's perspective, what the PayTo flow user experience looks like. So obviously, there's the agreement, which is a key part of the actual flow, and then obviously connected to the payment. Either in this instance with insurance, it could be recurring or maybe even one-off. Jaimie, I might bring you in at this point. Can you maybe talk to Zepto's role in what Tom just shared with us and what's happening under the hood?
Yeah, so there's two important steps that happened behind the scenes. If we remember from our last webinar, there is the agreement creation. So at that moment where the user is actually going through the checkout process, and right as that notification appears on their phone that the agreement is available for them to review, there was that endpoint. So there's that merchant actually interacted with Zepto's endpoint to create that agreement at that point. And then once the user actually accepted the agreement, and we sent off that webhook notification back to the merchant to advise that the agreement was accepted, then at that point, again, there's another interaction happening with Zepto's PayTo API to actually initiate the payment. So there's two major things happening behind the scenes there. And then, of course, so you have the webhook notifications that are sent as well, just to ensure that the merchant application is aware of what's happening behind the scenes as well. So if the agreement was accepted, was it declined? Did the payment go through successfully, or did it fail, and why?
Got it. Okay, that's great. And maybe, Justin, can you talk a bit about, from a merchant perspective, what do they need to be doing to facilitate a PayTo transaction?
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, as Jaimie just said, the two parts being agreement and payment are really where the merchant will be constructing API requests through to Zepto. And as a part of those requests, they'll need to pass in, obviously, the required data which is needed to create or instantiate that agreement up front. So in the use case that Tom just ran through, it was obviously collecting that validated pay ID that belonged to Cameron Smith, an alias for Tom Campbell, their name, and then obviously the details that are specific to the agreement that is being set up with that end customer. So again, in that example, I think it was $150 on a monthly basis, constructing that API request through to Zepto. Zepto will grab that, create the agreement as Jaimie ran through. And then when it comes to a payment perspective, when that payment becomes due each month, it's constructing that payment initiation through to Zepto, ensuring that the request that the merchant is sending through conforms to the agreement bounds. So again, if they submit a request to collect a payment, it needs to be $150 per month. If it sits outside of that, let's say the merchant tries to charge $200, then Zepto will validate or throw back a validation error that says, no, this is not what the customer has authorized. So from a merchant perspective, it's really just collecting the required data, passing it through to Zepto, and then making sure that the payment requests conform to what the customer has agreed to.
Fantastic. Okay, great. I think that really does a good job of setting the baseline for what's happening from a product perspective, what Zepto's role and what the merchant needs to be doing. So thanks, guys. We're getting some questions come in already, which is great. So I might actually start to share some of those. We've got Jake who's asked, what are the limits on PayTo transactions? Is there a certain dollar threshold where PayTo cannot be used? Tom, as product manager, I'll get you to give this one an answer.
Yeah, sure. So the specific limits for individual PayTo transactions, I think there's a couple of parts here to consider. The first of which are the terms of the agreements, where in theory there isn't there is sort of no upper limit from a sort of a user's perspective on what you can actually set that agreement to transact. Where you may end up encountering limits are more so on the banking side, with any sort of fraud controls that are present, or account limits that are implemented based on the risk profile of that particular financial institution. So you might find some variability there, but largely it's down to the individuals to agree the terms of their transacting, and that can be whatever the agreement states and whatever those parties are comfortable with.
Got it. So at a let's call it a scheme level, no limits per se, but then the agreement level, limits kind of can be defined. And then at the bank level, there's obviously the banking rules that are in play from a limit perspective. Is that fair?
I believe so, yes. And however, that said, I think there's just one caveat at a scheme level. I do believe there is sort of a max transaction amount, but it's potentially something like $100 billion, which I don't know how many folks will be transacting $100 billion over PayTo, but if you do, you might need to talk to your bank manager.
Okay. I don't believe I've ever transacted at that level, or maybe over will in my lifetime. But anyway, good to know. Thanks, Tom. I'm going to keep going with questions because they are coming through, and we're getting some people voting for them as well, which is great. So this one from Greg. How long will an authorization request remain pending in a customer's banking environment? Will regular prompts be sent to the customer? Justin, I might get you to jump in on this one.
Yep, of course. I mean, by default, an agreement will be pending for a customer for up to 5 calendar days, at which point it will expire if no action has been taken. So by action, either an authorization or a decline from that end customer. In terms of will regular prompts be sent, again, that's up to the banks themselves and how they handle their interaction with their end customers. I'd like to say that yes, every 24 hours a prompt might be sent out. However, that's probably not the case with a number of the institutions just yet. The other call out is that whilst there's a defined default expiration period, those agreements can also be recalled prior to that expiration period occurring. So if there was a time-sensitive limit that was imposed on a transaction, let's say you've locked in an FX rate and we're using PayTo to purchase funds to load up a wallet or a card, and that rate was only valid for 1 hour. You could recall that agreement after 1 hour, so the customer could no longer authorize once it had been called back.
Got it. So 5 days is the standard, but then there is controls in place for the merchant or the business to be able to withdraw that in or to call that sooner. Okay, great. Tom, is there anything, I mean, we talked about from a banking variability perspective, is there anything else to add from your perspective, what you're seeing across the market?
Not so much in that space at the moment, CBD. Nothing off the top of my head.
Okay, no worries. Let's keep moving because these questions are coming through, which is great. Keep putting them in and please keep voting for them, audience. So we've got a question from Jake again, and this one's received a number of votes, pushed straight to the top. Do you see use cases for PayTo with one-off transactions, or is the primary use case for direct debit style recurring transactions? Jaimie, I might get you to jump in on this one.
Yeah, so the short answer is yes. Some of the use cases, as an example, is simple e-commerce process. There's also a use case where somebody might not want they might not want to allow automatic withdrawals from their bank account. So it might be where they want full control over that, whether it's technically recurring, but they still go in to manually approve those payments. So again, in an e-commerce world, this is where I'm checking out, I'm buying this t-shirt, it's sending me an agreement. I have, let's just say, 5 minutes to authorize this agreement before my cart checks out. I approve this agreement for, store X to actually pull $55 from my bank account. And then once it's authorized, then the actual checkout process is complete and it debits the funds from my account in real time. So we're actually starting to see quite a bit of that one-off use case in the e-commerce world.
Okay, and we've actually got a question here from Brent as well, and again, a number of votes, and this is kind of related. So with the agreed amount in the agreement, the limit, the amount that's populated, how do you handle use cases like a power bill where the amount is variable each month? Jaimie, maybe just continue and cover that one off.
Yeah, definitely. So that kind of ties into how flexible agreements are and how you can set them up. So you can actually set the terms and the type of the frequency. So in this case, for an energy bill, you could actually set so that it's meant to be variable. So instead of actually passing through a, strict amount that will be debited, let's say on a monthly basis, it's actually a max amount that you're passing through. So as an example, you could do for energy bill, looking at the past 6 months of usage, knowing that my gas bill is roughly $125 a month, but there are still, maybe peaks and troughs when it comes to those energy bills. My max amount might be $250 as an example. And that allows the merchant to actually build any amount up to $250 per month. So it really does give you that flexibility to be able to bill variable amounts without having to get a unique agreement every single time you want to debit that customer.
Okay, great. So a lot of flexibility in the way in which you can structure PayTo agreement and apply it to a variety of use cases. Great. So we've got a question here. This one looks like it's specific. So we have an app under construction and have the Zepto API integrated. What is the difference between the two payment solutions? Also, can PayTo be an in-app solution where a user doesn't have to leave their app to make payments between users? So I'm not quite clear on that one. Does anyone want to jump in on that one? I think we might need a bit more clarity, but Justin, I might see if you can.
At a high level, yeah. So again, it probably depends on what specific product functionality you have integrated in your existing application, but high level, PayTo is a set of specific PayTo endpoints which would need to be integrated into your app. It operates in a very similar way to a number of our other products in terms of webhook notifications, request structure, etc. The second part of the question, can PayTo be an in-app solution where they don't have to leave the app to make payments? So yes and no. I guess there is always an out-of-band experience to approve an initial agreement. So the customer will always have to leave your environment in order to approve or decline and view those agreement details within their own banking application. So if I bank with CBA, I'm always going to have to go to my CBA or CBA internet banking to view and approve agreements. However, once that agreement is in place and it is active, depending on what terms have been agreed upon, then payments themselves are and can be a fully in-app experience, right? There's no need to continually leave your merchant environment to go back to the banking environment for the purposes of approving payments, assuming that the agreement that was created up front allows that sort of flow. So hopefully that answers your question at a very high level, but yeah, happy to chat through if there's more detail you want to provide.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Justin. So I might skip to some other questions that we've received and were unable to answer at previous webinars that I think are interesting to probably discuss here today. So maybe this one's for you, Jaimie. As we see PayTo grow, what does the future look like for PayID? Right? Are there benefits to having both available?
Personal opinion, I find PayID really important in this scenario. With PayID being on the market for over 5 years now, there's just, people know PayID on the market. So combining PayID with PayTo is actually helping, I feel like, the adoption of PayTo, since there is that knowledge. So when you're actually creating that PayTo agreement, like Tom showed in his demo, actually, you can use PayID. So really embracing, kind of combining the two to launch PayTo and for people to feel more and more comfortable with this new technology is really important. So I actually see it as really helping for the adoption of PayTo.
Awesome. Anything else to add, Justin or Tom?
No, I think just there's just that awareness and there's that sort of that brand awareness and equity in that, and it builds confidence, in consumers when they're sort of interacting with this new tech, as Jaimie said. So important to leverage it.
Fantastic. Awesome. Okay, we've got another question that's come through. We received a couple of votes from Balkian. I hope I said that correctly. Does PayTo always return the whole real bank account holder's name of the payer in cases of a joint account, personal and business bank account? Who wants to jump in on this one?
Happy to have a stab. I think at this point, in terms of the lookup capability at this point, we would expect there to be a return of the name on file. If that happens to be a joint account, and I think that's something that we'd want to test with and see what comes back. Across a few different financial institutions to verify that it's the case. But we do expect to see a little bit of variability in that sense, but otherwise we'd expect the lookup to reflect the name associated with the account. Jaimie,
so in a joint account scenario, we'd expect joint account holders to be presented, yeah?
Provided they've got a valid PayID in that case, and there's no limitations on their ability to create that in the event that the account has two names against it.
Okay.
But yeah, it'd be great to actually go and I don't think we've actually gone through that process in detail and tested that one, so that might be a really good one to have a look at. Great.
Awesome. Great question. Thank you. All right. Thanks, Tom. Okay. A couple of other questions that we received previously, and maybe, Tom, I'll stick with you on this one. And I suppose without getting too in the weeds of the technical detail, can you just tell us a bit about the Zepto platform?
Yeah, sure. So I think broadly, on the platform side, if it breaks out into your software and the hardware that we've got that's powering these solutions, on the software side, it's all API first. And so, our goal there is to create some easy to reason about RESTful APIs designed with developer experience in mind, first and foremost. And that sort of features other pieces in order to assist with processing high volume. So for us, that means auto scaling to make sure that at those volumes, our system's capable of handling that on your behalf. And on the hardware side, talking to our role as a connected institution and directly connecting to the NPP's payment rails, that means having the same hardware in place as the major financial institutions, as well as having that Swift integrated and monitored hardware. So broadly, obviously there's a lot more sort of technical detail behind that, but those are sort of some of the principles that sort of come through when it comes to our platform.
Fantastic. Justin, I might throw this one to you, given your team's really in the trenches with our customers and partners during the integration of PayTo. So, generally speaking, as I'm sure many of the audience are thinking about, how do I get ready to implement and launch PayTo for my business? Can you just talk through how should a business prepare to integrate PayTo? What should they have in place prior, to ensure they're best prepared?
Thanks, Chris. I think trenches is maybe a bit extreme. I like to think we make it a picnic. But I think, with regards to that question, it is going to depend on the organization itself. So the underlying architecture, available development resource, tech stack. But I think one of the things we do really well at Zepto is work closely with our client base to understand those challenges and help bridge the gap as much as we can on our side. So really, for more agile businesses looking to implement a PayTo solution, I think it comes down to first and foremost, understanding the use cases and flows that need to be built, and potentially how they differ to the other payment mechanics that they offer, particularly around that front end agreement flow, which isn't something you typically see with cards or traditional direct debit. And then the obvious one, having the available resource to scope and build the required integration in a defined time period. Don't love giving estimations, but let's say somewhere around sort of 6 to 8 weeks for an end-to-end build, test, deployment for a fairly straightforward use case. When it comes to, I guess, more enterprise businesses with complex infrastructure and, they do want to move into the real-time world, again, critical to understand use cases and flows, but also how these may or may not sit in their existing tech stack. So their current payment tech may rely on batch processes, platforms that don't readily support the level of API integration needed to curate that sort of optimal PayTo experience. And, from what Tom ran us through with the flows at the start, there's obviously a level of API integration that's going to be key, particularly again around that agreement setup, where there is that call to action for a customer to authorize an agreement request. So for these sort of organizations, it's potentially looking at things like introducing a microservice layer to handle agreement creation, ensuring that front end customer experience sits at parity with their other payment offerings, and then potentially still falling back to existing processes that are really hard to move away from, especially on legacy tech. So, example is batch process for actual payment initiation. I hope that paints a bit of a picture. Always hard to give a real generic answer to that question that applies across the board. As I said, dependent on organization, tech stack, resources, but something that we're definitely well-versed and familiar with working through here at Zepto.
Awesome. I think some really, really just great pointers there for people to take away and think about as they start to prepare, and go through the process of getting funding and getting resourcing. So thanks, Justin. We've got a couple of other specific questions. I can see that we haven't had any from the audience in a while. Just a reminder, if you've got questions, please do post them. Otherwise, I'll get through a couple more before we wrap up. Jaimie, I'm going to throw this one to you. This one's pretty specific, but I think it's important. Are there any notifications from accounts linked to a PayTo agreement when the agreement is frozen or ceased?
Short answer, yes. So any action that's taken from the customer side, so the payer or the one who has the agreement. So let's say they cancel the agreement, they suspend or pause or freeze their agreement. We actually get that notification back and pass that on to the merchant. So as an example, on a monthly basis, if the end customer, they have a recurring agreement and they pause or cancel their agreement, we actually get notified, and the merchant is notified that at that point, that agreement's been canceled or paused, and they can no longer actually initiate a payment against that agreement. So in real time, they were made aware of that, and they can either choose to contact the customer to request to either decide what or ask them why they canceled it or why they suspended it, or to even send a new agreement their way. So yes, any action that's taken, they do get a notification.
Awesome. Okay, fantastic. So lots of transparency and visibility to the merchant on the action from the consumer's end. Great. So I suppose another one, and maybe Justin, I'll get you to jump in here. A lot of people are talking about business customers, right? And we said earlier that we're fairly early on in the availability of that. But can you maybe just share some of the known PayTo use cases that relate to business accounts?
Yeah, definitely. I think, as you said, the obvious preface to any answer here is that business account reachability is still sitting pretty low across banks, and that's consisting mostly of sole traders or single level auth on accounts. That being said, we are actively exploring a number of B2B use cases. One of our most prominent ones, and ones that we're most excited about with one of our partners, Ozzetti, is around the superannuation, payroll, and e-invoicing space. And that's resonated really well with both Ozzetti and as well as a number of their customers, and hopefully continue to expand that particular use case across the board as service reachability on business accounts expands. That being said, a number of, other B2B use cases, which we've also started working on and actively exploring, things like PayFac use cases, collecting payments from suppliers, orchestrating payments across organizations, both internally and externally. So definitely a number of exciting use cases that continue to pop up, and always keen to hear of those that we haven't thought about yet. So yeah, feel free to reach out if there's anything that you think is a good use case for PayTo in the B2B world.
Awesome. Yeah, I think a really important sector that PayTo is going to play an important role. So yeah, a lot of emerging use cases and applications there. So I haven't seen any other questions come through from the audience, and we're about 5 minutes left from the allotted time. And I think we might start to wrap this one up. So if the audience, you've got questions, please pop them in. We'll take the time to answer them now. Otherwise, I've got a final question for all the panelists. And I want you to, in 30 seconds, give me your response. Now, there's a lot of myths out there and a lot of unknowns around, what is PayTo. And I think this is a great forum for us to be able to bust those myths and dispel them. And so what do you think is the biggest misconception when it comes to PayTo? Tom, I might start with you.
Yeah, no worries. So I'd say one of the larger misconceptions at this point is around the exit from a merchant environment and transition into a banking environment, for that end consumer to approve the agreement as that, I suppose the misconception that friction is negative. What we've sort of observed, at least in this space, is that friction is somewhat positive in the sense that it's a trust building exercise. Having someone exit from a merchant experience, seeing something appear in their banking application, which they navigate to and enter via their own secure details. There's sort of a building of trust, which is somewhat more in the spirit of this particular product, building that sort of visibility and control and moving to an interface that they're familiar with, and a place that they'll sort of centrally manage these agreements. So, although initially it might be, there might be concern about completion rate or confusion, research has indicated that that's a positive piece, and not necessarily a hindrance to getting PayTo agreements, approved and completed. Thanks, Chris. That's mine.
Awesome. Sorry, I just went frozen there. I'm not sure if I didn't catch the answer, but I might kick over to Jaimie as we look to close this one out. What's your myth busting that you wanted to do?
I had to think about this one a little bit, but I really do think it is the concern with giving more flexibility and more control to the end consumer when it comes to PayTo. making canceling or suspending a little bit too easy for the end consumer, making it harder for a merchant to debit the funds. When in reality, I really think it is similar to what Tom said, actually. It is a trust building exercise. It's being more transparent. Consumers can already cancel their direct debit or even, blacklist a merchant by going directly to their bank. But it's just making everything easier for everybody, putting everything out on the out in the open. And I think it's just going to make everybody happier when it comes to understanding when, how their funds are being debited, and just that transparency.
Yeah, absolutely. More control into the consumer's hands, I think, builds trust, and that's only a positive thing.
Yeah, happy consumer, happy merchant.
Absolutely. And Justin, I'll get your response, mate. What myth can you bust?
Yeah, cool. I'll grab the easy one that no one's conveniently mentioned. Is that, and this is probably, to be fair, a myth that's already been busted. In that, the misconception is that PayTo is a one-to-one replacement of a BEX direct debit, and that's all it's going to be good for. I think, obviously based on the use cases which we've spoken about over the last couple of webinars and everything that Tom and Jaimie just so succinctly touched on, obviously points to PayTo being a fresh payment mechanic in the ecosystem, and really does open up a number of, non-traditional use cases for a bank-to-bank or account-to-account direct debit style payment. So yeah, excited to see what's to come.
Awesome, thank you. And we have just had one final question posted, and I might just do this as one last final. This is a quick one, hopefully. With credit card or Poly, users can complete the purchase process without leaving the app, but with PayTo, users have to go to the bank app to confirm the agreement to complete the payment. Is that correct? Tom?
They have to, oh, sorry. Tom, do you want to go?
Justin, jump in.
So yeah, very similar to one of the questions that was asked before. With PayTo, they will always have to leave the app to approve an agreement, but not necessarily an individual payment. So if it is a one-time purchase, then yes, they will have to approve the agreement in the banking app, which in turn is essentially an approval for that one-time payment. If it's a recurring payment or an ad hoc payment that's initiated from within a merchant application, then as long as the agreement is in place and active, payments can be initiated against that agreement without leaving that environment. So yes, but also no.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And we are just over time. So I want to say thank you to our panel members. Really great to get your insights today and answer a bunch of really, really great questions. And also to the audience, thank you for joining us. Thank you for your great questions. These forums are really about you and about making sure we're getting the information to you that you need to run your business and make the important decisions. If you're interested to speak to the team on your own projects or initiatives, or understand how PayTo or other real-time account-to-account solutions can work in your business, please reach out. Otherwise, we'll have our next webinar coming up in the next month, so please watch out for that. Thank you all. Have a great day.
See ya.